I arrived at their house on Christmas Eve with a cane. The night air bit my cheeks and the porch light made my shadow long and slow. My son opened the door and grinned like he'd been waiting for a joke. "You look barely able to walk," he said loud enough for the hallway to hear. "Maybe it's time to downsize, Dad. Move to a smaller place." The laughter followed him into the kitchen. I smiled, thin and steady. People like to laugh when someone looks weak. It makes them feel safe. They fussed over my coat and handed me a cup of cider. The tree was tall and the candles flickered. My heart beat like a small drum under my ribs. They set places for me and then talked about floor plans and spare rooms as if my life was already a thing to tidy away. The cane in my hand felt honest and heavy. It kept me grounded and gave my face the tired look they expected. I had practiced that tired look for weeks. I let them think I needed help. I let them see what I wanted them to see while I kept a secret folded inside my coat. It was a small thing, a stack of paper I had photocopied until the drawer was full. The paper looked official. It had dates and stamps and a forged signature. It said I had sold the house. My name was on it, but the handwriting was wrong. Before we go any further, before the story unfolds and the truth comes out, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. If you want the whole scene, stay with me. They handed me a glossy brochure that said retirement living and clapped like it was a present. I opened my small wrapped box and let the paper fall away. Inside were copies of that sale contract, neat and real looking, ready to be seen. The room went quiet like a drum that stopped. For months I had kept notes and copies and patience. Tonight, patience would pay. The cane tapped the rug as I placed the first paper on the mantel, right where everyone would see it. I sat by the fireplace while they talked about floor plans and smaller rooms. The fire made shadows on the wall and I used the shadows to hide my hands. The cane leaned against my chair like a guard. My son clapped his hands and said, "Imagine less to clean. Think of all the trips we could take if you moved." People laughed, forks clinked, and I let the laughter wash over me. Inside, something quiet and sharp began to take shape. Weeks earlier, I had found a paper in a drawer that was not mine. My heart stopped for a second when I read it. It was a sale contract with my name on it, signed, dated, and stamped. It said I had agreed to sell the house to someone I did not know. My name looked like my name, but it was not in my hand. It was forged. I remember the cold in that moment, the feeling that the floor had dropped out from under me. I photocopied the contract, every stamp and shaky line, and then I copied the pages again and again until the drawer was full of duplicates. I did not tell anyone. I kept the real paper hidden in a safe place and I taped the copies into envelopes and labeled them with calm handwriting. I had learned that truth needed proof. One sheet of paper could be a lie, but many copies in many hands becomes a story that cannot be erased. Now, months later, they made jokes about my cane and my walking. My son thought the house was already his. He did not know about the paper I kept. He did not know what I had wrapped in my coat. I touched the cane and felt steady. I had a plan to show them something they could not ignore. I practiced my slow walk a few times in front of the bathroom mirror so it looked like I really needed the cane. My hand tightened on the wood and I let the muscles in my face settle into the tired look they expected. People believe what they see. If I looked weak, they would feel safer in robbing me. I wanted them to feel safe while I counted their footsteps. The night before Christmas I wrapped the photocopies like a gift. I used shiny paper and a red bow. The copies felt odd under the paper, like secrets in a present. I wrote a small card in block letters, "Open this when you are ready for the truth." My hand shook only a little. I set the package in a manila envelope and then I put that into a box. I wanted it to look like another one of the bright boxes under the tree. Early on Christmas morning I arrived at the house before anyone else. It was still dark and cold. I parked down the block and walked up the path slowly, cane in hand. The porch light warmed my face. I opened the door with a key I had kept and moved quietly, carrying the box like a visitor carrying a small, stubborn flame. I placed the package on the mantel above the fireplace. It looked right there, like it had always belonged. Then I sat in the chair and waited. I drank my coffee and listened to the house waking up. I heard footsteps overhead and the sound of cups clinking. The plan felt dangerous and right. I had to be patient now, because the best surprises simmered. They came down the stairs like a wave of noise and color. My son wore a sweater with a deer on it, my daughter had bright lipstick, and my grandchildren barreled into the living room laughing. They all crowded the couch and the room filled with paper and ribbon. My heart thudded a slow drum. I sat and watched the faces I knew and the faces I had learned to study for signs of guilt. My son handed me a small, glossy brochure as if it were a trophy. "Look, Dad. Retirement living with full service. We can help you move in." He smiled with the kind of pity that hurts. My daughter offered me eggnog and said, "You need to rest. We'll handle everything." The grandchildren tore open boxes and squealed. Presents sat like 1,000 small storms around us. I kept my hand on my cane and let them unwrap their joy. Every laugh was like a test. I had folded into my plan the idea that they would not notice the mantel gift right away. People always focus on the wrapped boxes near the tree. The mantel was less obvious. I had made the choice on purpose. When their bellies were full of cottage pie and layered smiles, the shock would have more sway. Then my son nudged me and said, "Open yours now, Dad. It's your turn." The room turned to me like a theater. I stood slowly, feeling the wood under my hand, and unwrapped my own small package with fingers that had not trembled for a long time. Inside were not socks or cologne. There were copies of a deed and a contract, printed to the last stamp. They were wrapped like a punch. The paper slipped from my fingers and the room fell into a hush. The silence after the paper hit the carpet lasted a breath and then a gasp. My daughter's face changed from bright to blank in seconds. My son's smile froze like a statue that had been told a secret it could not shape. The grandchildren kept playing for a moment, then one stopped and looked up. The deed lay on the floor like a small, heavy truth. I lifted a copy and placed it on the mantel for everyone to see. The copies looked neat and official. They had my name, my signature, at least the forgery looked that way, and the date. The crowd shifted as if a wind had moved through them and unsettled everything. My son tried to laugh it off and reach for the papers, but his hand stopped halfway. At that moment, the neighbor who had always stopped by to return a tool stepped forward. He was a retired police officer and he had come to the party with a plate of cookies. I had told him hours earlier about my plan and he had agreed to be there. He stood up and spoke quietly, "I need to look at that paper." He took the copy and held it like any officer would, steady and careful. Then he said two words that cleared the air, "Call dispatch." A younger officer in uniform stepped in through the door like a shadow made official. He showed a badge, then handed a plain envelope to the older officer. The older man opened it and read. His face did not change much, but his voice did. "We have an arrest order." The room made a sound like a dozen small plates falling. I remember the way the weight lifted off my shoulders, not because someone was taken away, but because the truth was finally standing up. My son looked at the officer like a man who had been seen through a window and found to be empty. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words tasted wrong on his tongue. My daughter put her hands to her mouth and cried. The officers worked calmly. They read the copies I had presented, compared them, and took notes. The older neighbor gave his statement and the younger officer asked my son a few questions. They explained the paperwork that said they suspected fraud and coercion. My son's face went white. He sputtered and then quieted. The neighbors who had laughed earlier watched with eyes wide as the police wrote down names and dates. I sat back in the chair and felt my cane press into the rug. The sound of boots on wood was like rain on a roof, methodical, steady, necessary. For months I had lived nights full of fear, doors that I had found open, papers that had disappeared, a note in my handwriting that I did not write. I had watched the people I loved walk around the rooms like strangers with maps. Now the map was being read aloud by someone who could do something about it. When the officers left with papers and with one very quiet man in handcuffs, the room hummed with grief and shock. My daughter sobbed into her hands. My grandchildren asked simple questions that adults did not answer. I picked up my cane and felt the old would steady me in a new way. The mantel held the copies like a flag. The rest of the day passed in a daze, but the night felt cleaner, like a window washed. After the arrests, the next days moved fast and slow all at once. There were forms to sign and people to meet. Detective calls and a visit to the precinct. Shepherding through legal things was a maze I had not wanted to enter, but I had evidence and witnesses and neighbors who had watched. The county pressed charges. The DA's office took the case and said they would pursue fraud and elder exploitation. That made my hands shake with relief. I learned to sleep again, though sleep felt fragile. When I lay down, the house no longer felt like a trap. I had pictures of my grandchildren on the bedside table and not a trick on the mantel. Officers came by to take statements and to secure copies of the forged papers. The bank froze suspect accounts and a lawyer said words I had longed to hear: "We will protect your property." The house was secured with new locks and a new sense of right. People brought casseroles and stopped by with small bouquets. My neighbors apologized in ways that were shy and honest. Mrs. Lang from next door hugged me and said, "We didn't see it." The words were soft and real. I accepted the apologies because the truth had made them possible. Some nights I sat by the fire and turned my cane in my hand. It had been a tool of support, and now it had become a trophy of endurance. I polished it and leaned it against the chair where I could see it every morning. In therapy, I moved a little more each week. The therapist said small steps were good. I practiced balancing and walking without thinking about what others thought. My body learned a new rhythm. The news picked up the story. A small local station did a piece titled "Proof on the Mantel." My phone buzzed with messages from people I had not seen in years. The world felt wider. For the first time in a long time I felt like a man who had been listened to. I started to laugh again, small and surprised at first. Humor returned like sunlight through curtains. At the senior center, I joined a ballroom class because my therapist said movement helps memory and joy. I walked into that bright room with my cane tucked to the side and felt awkward and alive. The music was soft and the chairs filled with men and women who had wounds like mine. The dance teacher took my hand and guided me through steps that looked complicated but felt natural after a while. My cane sat by my coat, but my feet learned rhythm. We moved in circles and I learned to trust my legs. The laughter of the class became a medicine. I felt lighter and I began to imagine an evening where my grandchildren would watch me spin and not fear. Weeks later, I put my cane on the mantel like a quiet joke. It was not a sign of weakness anymore. I had it on a stand and polished it. The cane looked handsome, a story carved into wooden varnish. I told the kids that it was my dance partner now and they laughed and touched it like it was a small relic. The cane had carried me through fear and then led me back to life. Christmas came around again and I hung a small tag on the cane that read, "Truth carried here." The mantel felt full of memory and not danger. I had learned that a tool can be many things: support, weapon, trophy. Mine had been all three. That night I danced with Helen from the coffee shop and the lights on the tree blinked like small stars. My feet remembered steps I had forgotten. My heart felt a clean kind of brave. The next chapter would tell of a year of small repairs, of trust cautiously given and slowly earned. I was ready for those days, and the house finally felt like mine again. The week after the arrests felt like waking up in a different town. The prosecutor called to say they had enough to move forward. I listened to the words and let them sink in. I had read them in books, never thought they would land on my doorstep like a slow rain. Friends came by with pies and casseroles. My neighbor Helen brought over extra socks and said quietly, "We should have seen it sooner." I told her it was okay. She hugged me like she wanted to stitch the old things back together. I spent afternoons at the kitchen table with papers spread out. Detective Morales came by with photocopies and questions, her pen moving fast. She asked for dates and times and the small things I had written in my notebook. I described the night I found the forged contract and the cold rush in my chest. I handed over every copy. The officer nodded and said, "You did the right thing coming to us." Her voice sounded like a door opening. At the bank, the manager walked me through the freeze on the accounts. She was kind and serious, like a person who fixed leaks in other people's lives. "We'll help you get it back," she said. I signed forms and gave statements. All those small steps felt like laying stones along a path. They made a walkable way forward. In the evenings I read the messages people sent. Some were strangers who had been through similar things. One older man wrote, "I lost money to my daughter once. Thank you for standing up." The words reached me like hands. I answered with plain thanks and told him to be careful. The world felt kinder and scarred at once. I kept my cane near the door because I liked the look of it there now, not a stick of need but a token of the fight. I polished it after dinner and set it back in its place by the shelf. Later, I sat on the porch with a warm mug and looked at the street where the kids rode bikes. I realized that the small world around me had shifted. People watched differently now, less with pity, more with respect. The mantel still held copies of the forged papers like a banner of proof. I ran a thumb across the table edge and felt steady. The fight was not over, but it had changed. I had changed with it. The hospital visit for my old backache turned into a surprise meeting. The nurse recognized me from the news. She smiled and said, "You did us proud." I told her I had only done what I had to. On the drive home I thought about how small acts add up, keeping notes, photocopying papers, asking for help. All the little things I had done now made a chain strong enough to hold. I felt a tired sort of pride. My grandchildren came over to spend an afternoon. They wanted to build a model car and insisted I show them how to cut pieces just so. Their small hands were quick and clumsy, and I laughed when glue got on their fingers. They climbed into my lap and called me coach like I had always been. Those moments were medicine. The house felt warm in a way I had missed for months. Rosalind stopped by with a thermos of tea and news from the lawyer. "They filed charges this morning," she said, voice steady. "The DA will present the case in 2 weeks." I nodded and felt the old fear bubble up, but then subside. I had proof in witnesses and new locks. I also had a pattern of care that the court could see. My hands trembled a little as I reached for my cane. Rosalind's touch on my arm steadied me. That night I made a small list of things to do: call the bank, check on the kids' school play, polish my shoes for court. The list made life manageable. When I looked at the mantel, the forged papers caught the light like a warning. I felt grateful for the neighbor who had come as a witness and the officer who had listened. The world had small helpers if you asked. In the quiet hour before bed, I practiced a little dance step from my class. My feet remembered the rhythm better than my head. I smiled at the progress. Tomorrow would bring another day of court prep and doctor visits and learning to trust my feet again. But for now, I sat in the chair and sipped tea, and the house hummed a calm song. I was not alone in that room anymore. The hearing day came with rain like a steady drummer. I put on my best jacket and polished my shoes until the leather shone. Rosalind drove me to court and held my hand in the car like she was giving courage through skin. The courthouse smelled of old wood and new paper. I felt small and strong all at once as we walked inside. People stared for a moment, the man from the news, and then let their lives go, the way people do. Cross-examination in court felt like a test of calm. The defense lawyer tried to make my memory seem foggy, but I had answers that were clear and specific. I spoke slowly about the forged contract, the nights I found doors open, the bank's fraud alert. My voice did not wobble. The judge watched and asked a few questions. Her eyes were tired but fair. When Detective Morales walked in with the envelope of evidence, I felt a small jolt of hope. Witnesses testified, Helen described the phone calls she heard, Frank the retired officer explained the signs of forgery, and Rosalind spoke about my careful notes. Each voice made a wall of truth. The lawyer tried to poke holes, but the holes were small and the wall stayed strong. At one point, my son's lawyer asked me about my cane, trying to make it seem like weakness. I answered, it helps me stand. It does not make me less capable. The court murmured in understanding. After the hearing, the judge did not hand down a verdict that day. She took time to consider. Walking back to the car, Rosalind squeezed my hand and said, "You did well." I wanted to believe it, and I felt a warmth that came from being seen without shame. The drop of rain on my face felt like a gift. I drove home slower and let the world pass by gently, as if it had learned a lesson about speed and force. The mantel waited for me, patient and proud, proof that truth can sit in a room like a quiet guest. In the weeks after court, life returned to small rhythms. I kept my notifications on and my phone near in case the DA called. The news ran short pieces about elder fraud and the story of a man who had put copies on his mantel to prove his case. Strangers sent messages thanking me for standing up. Their words warmed me like little blankets. I answered each with a simple, honest sentence, "Thank you. Be careful. Keep proof." My son wrote a letter that arrived folded and stiff. I read it twice and then sat with it on my lap. He wrote words that tried to explain, to soften his actions, to say he was sorry. I did not rush to respond. I folded the paper back and set it beside the phone. Forgiveness was not something I could sign in haste. It had to come when meaning matched words. I kept going to the therapy dance class. The coach taught me how to lead with my shoulders, how to feel music in my bones. I learned to smile in a way that was not just brave. Soon, I found myself standing in front of a mirror and practicing a twirl. It felt like practice for joy. My cane sat in the corner like a faithful friend. Sometimes I used it, sometimes I did not. Either way, it was always part of me. Neighbors stopped by for small things, sugar, a newspaper, a chat. They asked about the garden and my back. We talked like people who repair little fences. One afternoon Mrs. Lang and I planted bulbs together. The soil under my nails felt like a promise. The mantel with its copies remained in the living room, a quiet display of what had happened. Some nights I would look at it and feel the truth shine through the paper. The house was healing, one small action at a time. The arraignment was a short, sharp thing with papers and formal words. My son stood with a man who wore a neat suit and tried to look steady. When the judge read the charges, fraud, forgery, elder abuse, my knees felt weak for a moment. Then I gripped the edge of the chair and let the shock pass. The legal world moves like a machine. It does not rush, but it does not stop either. After the arraignment, the DA's office asked for more documents. I handed over every copy, every note, every photograph I had taken. The investigator looked at my notebook with a respect that made me breathe easier. "You kept good records," she said. That makes a big difference. I wanted to tell her the truth felt safer when it was written down. She nodded and went through the files like a farmer going over rows. The bank said they would help me reclaim funds and refund some charges. The manager sat across and explained how the bank was cooperating with law enforcement. The number was not small, the stolen money had left deep marks, but it was a start. I made a list of what I could replace and what I could not. Some things were memories and could not be purchased back. At home that night, I found an old photograph of my wife and me at the county fair, young and laughing. I held it for a long time and let the memory fill me. Then I placed the picture on the mantel near the copies. The firelight made both the photo and the papers glow. One was warm and small, the other cold and solid. Together they made a shelf of story. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosalind, "Dinner tomorrow?" I smiled and wrote back, "Yes. Bring the pie." Small things, steady things, made the night softer. The trial date drew near like a long, tense breath. The DA prepared witnesses and exhibits. My lawyer called and said they had a strong case. He explained legal words slowly so I could follow. I read the discovery files and felt the pattern fit together like a quilt. It was strange to watch a life you lived become a paper trail in the hands of others. But this time, the trail led to help. I practiced my testimony in the living room. Rosalind sat in the chair and listened with a steady face. "Speak clearly and slowly," she said. "Tell the truth and let them hear it." We went over dates and times, and she asked me small things to test my memory. It felt silly at first, but then it made me feel ready. The photos on the mantel seemed to watch like witnesses too. Neighbors offered to testify if needed. Frank called and said he would speak about my work on the volunteer crew. Helen wrote a short statement about overheard conversations. My phone filled with kind notes and offers of support. I kept them in order in a folder and felt less alone. The house hummed with quiet purpose. The night before the trial I barely slept. I sat by the window and watched the street. The world seemed ordinary and brave at the same time. I held my cane and thought about the small steps that had brought me here. I thought about the mantel and the copies, about the dancing class and the pie Rosalind would bring. Morning would come. When it did, I would stand and tell the truth again, and I would let whatever happened follow its path. For now, I breathed and let the house hold me. The trial day arrived bright and clear. I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer at my side and felt a calm that surprised me. The judge sat high and looked like someone who had read many stories. The defense tried to make the case seem like a family squabble. The DA answered with facts and dates. The room leaned in like a crowd listening to a tale by the fire. My son took the stand. He looked smaller than I remembered, and his voice cracked when he tried to explain. His lawyer pushed him, but he stumbled on the facts. The jury watched his face and the truth of fear and greed showed there. Then it was my turn. I walked up, swore my oath, and told my story plainly, the forged papers, the nights I found doors open, the bank transfer attempt, the staged scenes. I did not shout. I let the facts speak. The DA presented the security footage from the cameras we had placed in the living room. The video showed my son rifling a drawer, hands quick, face tense. The jurors sat and watched and the air felt heavy with small confessions. Witnesses testified, neighbors, Frank, Rosalind. Each voice laid the truth like brick on brick. When closing arguments came, the DA spoke with a slow fire about duty and respect for elders. The defense tried to smear motives. The jury deliberated for hours that felt like days. I sat in the hallway with my cane and mended my breathing. The weight pressed and then, finally, the jurors came back. I held my breath like a child. The foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty. The word landed like rain. Relief poured through me, clean and sharp. Justice did not erase the hurt, but it cleared space to heal. After the verdict, the sentencing felt quieter than I expected. My son stood before the judge with his shoulders bent. The judge spoke sternly about trust and harm and handed down a sentence that included probation, restitution, and counseling. It was not revenge. It was a call for repair. Tears came then, mine and some others in the room. My daughter sat with her face in her hands. I did not shout or gloat. I felt only a quiet settling. Life after court moved in softer waves. The bank finished returning some funds and I set up protections for my accounts. I changed passwords and added alerts to catch any strange activity. The locks were replaced again. It felt like fencing a garden against winter winds. I started meeting with a counselor who helped me name the small hurts that had built up. We talked about trust and fear and how to plant new roots. People in the neighborhood stopped us on walks and thanked me for speaking up. The local paper ran a story about elder rights and how one small action can become a shield. I signed a few letters and spoke at the senior center about keeping records and taking nothing for granted. The Mantel still held the copies for a while, then I put them in a box and sealed it. Some pieces of paper should live in evidence, not on display. Rosalind and I began to talk about a small trip, to see the ocean maybe, or a lighthouse. The idea felt big and safe. I practiced dance steps in the living room and even taught the grandchildren one or two. The cane sat by the chair, polished and proud. I looked at it and thought, you led me here. The house felt like a place I had fixed with small, patient hands. The holidays no longer felt like traps but like promises. Spring came with sunlight that slid through the curtains like gold ribbons. I woke earlier each morning, the air cool and clean. The house was quiet, steady, no shouting, no steps that made me tense. Sometimes I walked out onto the porch with my coffee and listened to the birds. The cane tapped the wood softly, not from weakness now, but habit, a rhythm of peace. Rosalind came by with new curtains she'd sewn herself. We hung them together, her laughter soft as the fabric. This place feels lighter, she said. She was right. The old fear had left the corners. Even the mantel looked friendlier with a vase of flowers instead of evidence. The black box of documents stayed locked away in my desk, only a memory now. One afternoon, a reporter from the city paper knocked. Mr. Gray, may I interview you for a follow-up piece? People want to know how you're doing. I let her in. She asked careful questions, her pen scratching quietly. What kept you going? She asked. I thought for a moment. The truth, I said. And a cane that reminded me I could stand. She smiled at that. The article came out a week later, proof on the mantel, one man's stand against family fraud. It ran with a photo of me on the porch, cane in hand, sunlight behind me. Letters started to arrive, strangers thanking me, people sharing their own stories. It was humbling and heavy all at once. I kept each letter in a drawer labeled kind words. That night Rosalind and I walked around the block, talking about a summer trip to the coast. I moved slower than she did, but she never minded. The streetlights blinked on and she said, "You're walking taller, you know." I laughed. Maybe the cane's shrinking. She smiled, and the warmth between us felt like a promise. Summer's heat pressed on the windows, and the cicadas sang their endless song. I spent mornings tending the small garden by the fence. Tomatoes, peppers, sunflowers, all bright proof that life continues. The grandchildren helped water them, their laughter scattering across the yard like seeds. They called me coach again and ran races on the lawn. I cheered from my chair, cane across my knees like a whistle. My daughter visited one afternoon, alone. Her steps were slow, her hands nervous. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and led her to the porch. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her eyes held guilt and something softer, hope maybe. I divorced him, she said quietly. I should have sooner. I didn't speak, letting her words find their place. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't see how far it went. The apology sat between us like fragile glass. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was tired. I can't forget yet, I said. But maybe one day. She nodded, tears sliding down her face. That's fair, she whispered. She hugged me, a careful hug that didn't expect much but gave enough. When she left, the air felt heavy and lighter at once. That evening I told Rosalind about the visit. She smiled softly. It's a start, she said. I nodded. It was. Forgiveness wasn't a door you walked through, it was a path with many small gates. I looked at the cane leaning beside the chair and thought how far I'd already walked. Later, I danced a few slow steps in the living room, the record player humming an old tune. The house smelled like tomato vines and peace. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I'd face it standing. By autumn, the newspapers had moved on, but the story still lived in the community. The senior center asked me to speak again, this time to a full hall. I stood on the small stage, cane in hand, and looked at faces lined with years and quiet strength. Keep your papers safe, I told them. And don't be afraid to ask for help. The law works if you shine light on the dark. When they clapped, I felt something deep settle in me, usefulness. Rosalind filmed the talk on her phone. Afterward she said, "You've turned pain into purpose." I shrugged. Maybe just into advice. We laughed, and she squeezed my arm. We stopped for ice cream on the way home, and I caught our reflection in a window, two people, older, braver, smiling for no reason but the moment. That night, I went through the old file box one last time. The forged papers, court documents, and letters of support lay in neat stacks. I read a few pages, then decided they didn't need to live in my house anymore. I called the museum downtown, the one that had shown interest in stories of resilience. They agreed to take the case file for their civic exhibit. Your cane too, if you'll part with it, the curator said. I thought about it all night. By morning, I wrapped the cane in soft cloth and carried it to the museum. They placed it in a glass case under warm light with a small card, proof on the mantel, a symbol of standing tall. I touched the glass gently. It wasn't just wood anymore. It was a story solid enough to outlive me. The next Christmas came gentle and bright. Snow fell early that morning, dusting the roof like sugar. I decorated the house with Rosalind and the grandchildren. Laughter filled the rooms again, the good kind this time. My daughter arrived carrying pies, her smile shy but real. "May I help?" she asked. I nodded. She joined Rosalind in the kitchen, their voices blending easily. The tree shimmered with ornaments, each one a small history. I hung a new one shaped like a cane, carved by one of the grandkids. "For Grandpa's courage," they said proudly. It dangled near the top, catching the light. After dinner, we gathered around the fireplace. The black box of documents was gone, but I had kept one copy of the forged deed. I tossed it into the fire. The paper curled and turned to ash, sparks rising like small spirits leaving. "Let it burn," Rosalind whispered. "It's over." We took a new family photo, everyone smiling, no shadows in their eyes. My daughter stood beside me, her hand light on my shoulder. It wasn't perfect, but it was healing. The grandchildren cheered when the camera flashed. Later that night, after the guests left, I sat by the glowing embers. Rosalind poured cocoa and leaned against me. "You did it," she said. I nodded. The house was mine again, but more than that, it was peaceful. I whispered into the quiet, my cane led, but truth carried me. The words felt right. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. Inside, warmth wrapped around us like forgiveness. I smiled at the tree, at the tiny wooden cane shining under its lights, and thought, Merry Christmas, to resilience. The new year opened with soft mornings and clear air. I woke without dread, brewed coffee, and watched light slide across the floorboards. Peace had become a habit, not a visitor. Rosalind and I planned small things, market days, weekend drives, visits to the coast when spring returned. Each plan felt like a new brick in a wall of safety. The museum exhibit opened in February. They invited me for the unveiling. The glass case gleamed beneath bright lights, and the plaque read, Proof on the Mantel, a story of strength and justice. My cane rested beside the forged papers, the same ones that had once felt like poison in my hands. People filed past, reading, nodding, some even wiping tears. A woman in her 80s touched my arm. You gave us courage, she said. I told my son to sign nothing without me present. Her words filled me with quiet pride. Sometimes small acts make ripples you never expect. Reporters came again, but this time, I didn't feel like a victim they were chasing. I was just a man who told the truth and survived it. Rosalind watched from the crowd, her smile like a steady lantern. After the speeches, we stood before the case together. Strange seeing it here, she said. Strange, but right, I answered. That night, back home, I missed the cane by the door. The corner looked bare. Still, it felt right that it now stood for more than me. I poured tea, turned on the radio, and let the music fill the room. For the first time, the silence didn't echo. It hummed. The mantel no longer needed proof, it had peace. Letters arrived from across the country. Some were typed, others handwritten in shaky script. People told me their stories, sons, daughters, neighbors, old friends. One woman wrote, Your courage saved my mother's house. Another said, I bought a cane just to remind me to stand tall. I kept the letters in a box labeled kindness. It grew heavier each week. Rosalind helped me answer them. We sat at the kitchen table, writing thank yous and advice on plain stationery. I told each writer to keep copies, take photos, trust their instincts. The world was full of people who needed to be reminded they weren't helpless. The museum story spread. A national newspaper picked it up with the headline, Proof on the Mantel, One Man's Stand Against Elder Fraud. The article went viral. TV shows called. I declined most but agreed to one interview. It was short and simple. The host asked, What message do you want people to take away? I said, That truth is heavy, but you can lift it if you hold it steady. The response surprised me, messages from lawyers, social workers, even students. Donations began to flood into the local Elder Protection Fund. They used my story as a campaign centerpiece. The idea that my worst day could help someone else sleep easier gave me peace. One evening Rosalind came over with a grin. You're famous, she teased, holding up a magazine with my photo. I laughed until my sides hurt. Only for standing up, I said. She kissed my cheek. That's the best kind of famous. We danced in the kitchen until the tea went cold, moving slow but smiling wide. By spring, the foundation contacted me. They wanted to hold a gala to raise funds for seniors' safety programs. They asked if I'd attend as a guest of honor. I hesitated, me in a tuxedo under chandeliers? But Rosalind's eyes sparkled. You have to, she said. It's your story, and your victory. So we went. The ballroom shimmered with light. Music floated through the air, gentle and bright. My photo hung by the entrance, me standing with the cane, the plaque below. People shook my hand, called me brave, and I tried to smile without feeling awkward. I wasn't a hero. I had just refused to disappear. When the host spoke about the fundraiser, he said they'd named a new grant after me, the Grey Fund for Elder Resilience. My throat tightened. They played a short video of my story, ending with me saying, "My cane led, but truth carried me." The audience stood and clapped. Rosalind squeezed my hand. Later that night, we slipped out to the garden behind the hall. The stars hung low and bright. I told her, I never thought justice could lead to this. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Sometimes light finds the cracks, Wilbert. Her words stayed with me. When we drove home, the night was quiet, Tucson lights twinkling ahead. I felt the weight of the past fall away mile by mile. The road no longer felt like escape, it felt like a homecoming. That summer, the museum exhibit toured other cities. They asked me to attend openings when possible. Rosalind and I packed light and drove cross-country. Each stop brought new faces, new thanks. In Los Angeles, a young man hugged me and said, "My dad read about you." He finally stood up to my uncle. In Denver, an older couple gave me a hand-carved walking stick. I carried it for the rest of the trip. The road was long, but the laughter between rest stops made it bright. Rosalind read maps while I told stories from my firefighting days. We sang to old songs on the radio, and sometimes, silence felt enough. The miles rolled under our wheels like forgiveness in motion. At a small motel near the coast, we watched the sunset paint the sea orange. Rosalind turned to me and said, "You ever think you'd make it this far?" I smiled. I thought I'd burn out before the light changed. She laughed, and her laugh sounded like healing. The next morning, I stood by the water with my new walking stick planted in the sand. The wind carried the scent of salt and new beginnings. I whispered a quiet promise, to keep moving, to keep standing, to keep forgiving. We drove home slowly, stopping in little towns, eating at diners where no one knew our names. It felt good to be ordinary again, two people chasing peace, not headlines. The house welcomed us back like an old friend. The mantel waited, bare except for a framed photo of us at the shore, 2 smiles, 1 story. Autumn rolled in golden and calm. The grant fund grew, helping seniors protect their assets. The local paper ran a follow-up, from victim to voice. They asked if I'd speak at a conference for law enforcement about elder awareness. I agreed. Standing before rows of officers, I told them how kindness had solved what anger couldn't. Listen to the quiet victims, I said. They often have proof, they just need someone to see it. Afterward, a detective approached me. "You changed how we handle these cases," he said. His words felt heavier than applause. At home, I noticed small changes. My daughter visited often now, bringing the kids. We started Sunday dinners again, simple meals, no tension. The grandkids filled the rooms with noise and joy. Sometimes I caught my daughter watching me, her eyes soft, and I knew the distance was closing. One Sunday, she handed me a small box. Inside was a new cane, carved with the word hope. "You'll need it for your dancing," she said. I laughed and hugged her tight. Forgiveness had found its place. That evening, Rosalind and I danced in the yard under string lights, music floating through open windows. I twirled her slowly, careful not to stumble. She laughed and said, "You getting better?" I replied, "That's because I've had good teachers." When the song ended, she rested her head against me. The air smelled like grass and memory. Winter came early that year, but I didn't mind the chill. It made the coffee taste better in the mornings and the house feel warmer at night. The museum exhibit finished its tour and returned home, now part of a permanent display. They asked if I'd attend the reopening. I stood again in front of the glass case, looking at the cane, the copies, and the photo of me smiling beside them. The plaque below had been updated, Wilbert Gray, the man who put proof on the mantel. Crowds moved through, some stopping to thank me quietly, others snapping photos. I shook hands until my fingers ached. A young journalist asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought about it. "Maybe," I said, "but then I wouldn't have learned what truth can do when you stand by it." She smiled and wrote it down. Rosalind and I went to dinner afterward, just soup and bread, and laughed about how fancy reporters made ordinary words sound profound. On the way home, snow began to fall, soft and slow. We pulled over by the river, got out, and let flakes land on our coats. She said, "You ever think about dancing in the snow?" I grinned. "Only if you lead." We did, small steps in the quiet white, laughter echoing against the dark trees. Back home, I placed a photo of that moment on the mantel. Not proof this time, just peace. The fire glowed, and I whispered, "Merry Christmas," in advance. The year had started with fear and ended with calm. The cane in the museum would stand for me, but here, in this house, I stood for myself. January brought a letter from the state. They were forming a task force to prevent elder fraud and wanted me to join as an advisor. I read the letter twice, not sure whether to laugh or cry. I wasn't a lawyer or a politician. But Rosalind put her hand on mine and said, "They don't need that. They need someone who's lived it." So, I accepted. The meetings were long and full of numbers, but when it came time for real stories, everyone listened. I told them how the sign starts small, missing mail, sudden kindness that hides greed, a forged line that changes everything. They took notes, eyes serious. By spring, the task force launched a hotline and education program. The first pamphlet bore a quote from me, "Keep copies. Keep courage." The local news covered it. People waved at me in grocery stores. Sometimes it still felt strange, being known for surviving pain. But I'd learned to let pride and humility share the same chair. I wasn't famous, I was useful. One evening, Rosalind and I cooked stew and ate by the fire. The grandchildren had drawn a picture of me for school, a man holding a cane, a superhero cape behind him. I laughed until tears came. "They think you're a hero," Rosalind said. I looked at the picture again. Maybe just a man who finally stood straight. The house crackled with warmth. Outside, wind howled. But inside, there was only comfort, the kind built one small truth at a time. By late spring, my daughter found steady work at the local library. She looked happier, calmer. We met for coffee every Sunday morning now. The first few times, we talked about weather and books. Then one morning, she said, "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me." I didn't answer right away. I just reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She told me about a support group for families recovering from financial abuse. "I go every week," she said. "I tell them my story so they won't make the same mistakes." Pride rose in me like warmth spreading through cold hands. She was trying, truly trying. Rosalind joined us sometimes. The three of us would sit by the window and plan small family gatherings. The grandchildren began visiting more, bringing stories and noise. They'd ask to hear the Kane story, and I'd make it short and funny, how Grandpa outsmarted the bad guys with papers on the mantel. They'd clap and ask if it was real. Every word, I'd say. The forgiveness I'd thought impossible was happening quietly, like dawn. Not sudden, but steady. I started to dream again, small dreams, like building a treehouse for the kids, maybe taking Rosalind to the coast again. One afternoon, I took out the last copy of the forged deed. I read it one last time, then tore it in half. "No ghosts left," I said aloud. Rosalind looked up from her book and smiled. "Then let's fill the space with laughter." And we did, soft, real laughter that healed better than any verdict ever could. summer stretched long and bright. The garden bloomed wild, and the grandkids ran through sprinklers while Rosalind baked pies. My daughter joined us often, sometimes with shy smiles, sometimes full laughter. The house that had once been a battlefield now rang with life. I started writing my story for the local newsletter, not the court details, but the lesson. Each week I wrote a small column called Standing Tall. I shared advice about protecting yourself, asking for help, and the power of simple truth. People stopped me in town to say they read it every Friday. It felt good to give something back that wasn't pain. The museum invited me to speak again, this time to a group of students studying social justice. I told them, heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they just hold on to proof when no one believes them. When the talk ended, the students applauded, and I thought about how much had changed in 1 year. That night, Rosalind and I sat on the porch swing. Fireflies blinked in the yard. "Feels like the world finally caught its breath," she said. "Maybe we all did," I answered. She leaned her head against my shoulder. The cane was in the museum, but she whispered, "You still walk like you have it." I smiled. "Because I do. Just inside now." Autumn returned with a softer light. The air carried the scent of apples and old leaves. I woke each day feeling lighter, like the house itself had exhaled. Rosalind started teaching me more dance steps. "You better every week," she said. "That's because I'm learning to let the music lead," I told her. Sometimes, when we danced in the living room, the grandchildren clapped and laughed. Their joy made the walls brighter. One afternoon, the museum called again. "Mr. Gray, your exhibit inspired a national feature. They want to include your story in the traveling show American Courage." The words sank in slowly. I agreed. The feature aired that winter, showing footage of the cane, the mantel, and me saying, "Truth carried me." My phone rang for days after. Reporters wanted quotes. Letters came from other countries. Rosalind teased, "You're international now." I laughed. All I ever wanted was peace in my own house. But secretly, it felt good that something born of pain had turned into light for others. That winter, donations to the Elder Protection Fund tripled. They renamed part of it the Gray Initiative. The first recipients wrote to me about the help they received. "You started a wave," Rosalind said. I smiled. Maybe just a ripple. But ripples reach far. I looked at the photo of the mantel in the museum catalogue. It reminded me that sometimes proof isn't about winning, it's about surviving long enough to tell the truth yourself. Winter deepened, and I spent more time writing. The local press asked me to expand my columns into a book. Rosalind helped me edit. We worked late at the kitchen table, her red pen tapping gently on the pages. "It's not about revenge," I said. "No," she replied, "it's about reclaiming your life." We titled it Proof on the Mantel, Standing Tall When It Matters. The day the first copies arrived, I held one like something fragile. My daughter stopped by and saw it on the table. "Can I read it?" she asked quietly. "Of course," I said. She took it home and called me 2 days later in tears. "Dad, it's beautiful. I'm proud of you." Those words healed more than time ever could. The publisher invited me to a small signing at the museum. The line wasn't long, but each person who came told a story: parents, neighbors, friends. One woman whispered, "You gave me back my voice." I signed her book and said, "It was always yours. You just had to use it." That evening, I walked through the museum one more time. The cane still stood under its light. I whispered, "Thank you, old friend." For the first time, I realized I didn't need it anymore, not even in my heart. The next spring, my health improved more than I expected. The doctor smiled at my test results. "You've got the heart of a man 20 years younger." I told him, maybe truth unclogs the arteries. He laughed, not sure if I was joking. Rosalind and I took our trip up the California coast at last. The ocean roared like freedom itself. We stopped at lighthouses, small cafes, and beaches where no one knew our names. One evening, we sat on a bluff watching waves crash below. "You think the past ever truly leaves us?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, but it stopped steering." We reached San Francisco by sunset. She danced on the pier, barefoot, her gray hair glowing gold. I joined her, clumsy but happy. A stranger clapped and said, "You two look like a movie." Rosalind grinned. "We are just learning to live again." On the drive home, we planned the next year, classes to teach, gardens to grow, letters to answer. Life felt full, not fast. Every mile we traveled reminded me that peace was not a gift but a muscle you built one truth at a time. That summer, I was invited to Washington, D.C., for an award ceremony. They called it the National Integrity Medal. I almost said no. Awards had never mattered to me. But Rosalind insisted. "It's not for pride," she said. "It's for proof that good men still stand." So we went. The ceremony was grand, flags, speeches, applause. When they handed me the medal, I said, I stood up because I was tired of sitting in silence. If this helps someone else do the same, then it's worth it. The room rose to its feet. Later, we walked through the memorial gardens. I looked at the rows of statues, faces of people who had endured, fought, rebuilt. I felt small among them but grateful. "You belong here," Rosalind whispered. "We all do," I said. "Anyone who refuses to stay broken." We flew home the next day. The medal hung in the living room for a while, then I moved it beside the family photos. I wanted my grandchildren to know it wasn't about fame, it was about standing when it hurt. By the next autumn, my daughter had bought her own home. She invited us to dinner. When we arrived, I saw something that made my throat tighten, a small wooden mantel, with a framed photo of me and Rosalind beside a new sign, "Truth lives here." My daughter smiled. I thought we'd start our own tradition. Dinner was filled with laughter and forgiveness. The grandkids performed a dance they'd learned, waving small sticks painted like canes. "For Grandpa's courage," they shouted. I laughed until my ribs hurt. Rosalind wiped a tear. "They are learning from the best," she whispered. After dinner, my daughter handed me a letter. "Probation's over," she said. "He's moving out of state." "I thought you should know." I nodded. "That chapter's closed," I said. "We'll let the ashes stay cold." As we left that night, she hugged me tight. "You taught me that truth isn't a weapon. It's a light." I smiled. "And you taught me forgiveness." We drove home under stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. The following winter marked exactly 2 years since the first Christmas with the cane. The house glowed with warmth again. Rosalind and I hosted dinner for friends, neighbors, and family. Frank from the museum came too, carrying a new photo of the exhibit's latest update, an entire section on elder resilience. As guests filled the house, I noticed my daughter helping the kids hang ornaments. No bitterness, no distance. Just laughter. Rosalind caught me watching and whispered, "You did it." I shook my head. We did. After dinner, I stood by the fire and told the grandkids one last story about that cane. It led me through fire, but truth carried me home. They clapped and asked if it was really over. "Yes," I said, smiling. "Now we just dance." Rosalind turned on soft music, and we danced again, the room full of light and movement. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, every heart felt full. The fire popped, and I tossed one last piece of paper into the flames, an old court notice, no longer needed. The ashes curled and vanished. "Good riddance," Rosalind whispered. I nodded. Merry Christmas, to resilience. The morning after that Christmas, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, still scented with pine and pie. I sat by the window and watched snow drift across the yard. Everything looked soft again, as if the world had decided to forgive itself. Rosalind stirred in the other room, humming a song I didn't recognize. For a long moment, I just listened. The phone buzzed. A message from the museum: the exhibit will be featured in a national holiday special. They'd like you to record a closing message. I smiled. The story still had wings. When the reporter came later that week, she asked, "What does this cane mean to you now?" I looked straight at the camera. It's a reminder that standing up doesn't always mean walking fast. Sometimes it just means not falling again. That line aired across the country. Letters poured in, children, veterans, grandparents, all saying the same thing: "You gave me courage." I pinned a few on the fridge. That night, Rosalind and I sat by the fire. She said, "Do you ever miss the quiet before all this?" I shook my head. No. Quiet used to mean fear. Now it just means peace. She smiled. Then keep it that way. When I went to bed, I glanced at the old Mantel photograph. Proof once sat there, but now love did. I turned off the light, whispering, "Thank you for carrying me, Truth." Spring brought color back to the yard. The grandkids helped me plant roses along the fence. "These are the brave ones," I told them. "They bloom even after the frost." They nodded solemnly, as if I'd told them a secret worth keeping. Rosalind started teaching a small dance class for seniors in town. "We need a co-teacher," she teased. So I joined her. At first, I stumbled, but she just laughed. "You're proof anyone can learn again," she said. The students called us the Silver Steps. Every class ended with applause and jokes. It wasn't just exercise, it was community. One afternoon after class, a man came up to me. "You don't know me," he said, "but your story helped my mother win back her house." My eyes burned. "Then every bruise was worth it," I told him. He gripped my hand and nodded. That evening, Rosalind and I walked home holding hands. "You think this is what healing looks like?" she asked. "I think it's what dancing through it looks like," I said. The porch light glowed ahead. Inside, the fire waited, warm as memory. 38 that summer, the mayor invited me to speak at the City Hall anniversary. I wore my best suit and the same red tie from my courtroom victory. The crowd filled the square, flags fluttering in the breeze. When I spoke, I didn't mention the pain. I spoke of what came after. "I thought justice would look like punishment," I said. "But it looks like this: sunlight, laughter, and second chances." The applause rose steady and strong. Rosalind stood in front, clapping hardest. Afterward, a boy asked for my autograph. "My grandpa says you're brave." I bent down and said, "Tell him bravery just means not giving up on good days." The boy grinned. The city gifted me a plaque, engraved with the words "Truth carried him." It joined the medal and the photo on my mantel. I didn't need more reminders, but I accepted it because it meant others believed, too. That night, we hosted a small dinner. My daughter toasted me. "To Dad," she said, voice steady. "To the man who taught me that falling isn't failure." Everyone lifted their glasses. Rosalind whispered, "You've come full circle." I smiled. "No," I said softly. "We just keep dancing around it." 39. As winter crept closer again, the museum held one final tribute before retiring the traveling display. They invited me to light a candle beside the cane. The hall was quiet, filled with faces I'd never met but who somehow knew me. I touched the glass lightly and whispered, "You did your job." Then I lit the candle and stepped back. Cameras flashed, but all I saw was the soft glow reflecting off the cane's handle. Rosalind stood beside me, her arm linked with mine. "It feels like saying goodbye," she said. "Not goodbye," I answered. "Just thank you." After the ceremony, we walked outside. Snowflakes drifted down. Across the street, the museum projected the words proof on the mantel onto its stone wall, letters glowing gold. I felt something inside settle for good. That night, at home, I opened my journal for the last entry. Justice found me. Peace stayed. Love grew. I closed it, placed it on the mantel, and let the fire warm the room. The shadows flickered, gentle and sure. I'd carried the truth long enough. Now, it carried me. Christmas Eve came again, 3 years after the first cane night. The house glowed with lights and steam from pies. My daughter hung a small silver ornament shaped like a cane on the tree. "For you," she said. "For what you taught us." I felt my chest tighten in a good way. The grandchildren ran circles around the tree, and Rosalind, my steady friend, moved through the kitchen with a sly laugh and a tray of cookies. The house sounded full and safe. We sat down to dinner and ate until the plates were bare. Stories came up, funny little things that had nothing to do with trouble. After dessert, I stood and tapped my glass. The room hushed like a crowd waiting at a play. "A year ago I said my cane led, but truth carried me," I began. "Tonight I want to say thank you for standing with me." I looked around at faces I had once feared would betray me. Some eyes were wet. Some smiled. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. It was the last copy I had kept, the forged paper that tried to steal my home. I walked to the fireplace and held it in my hand. The flames caught the edge and curled the paper into ash. Sparks rose like small fireworks. I watched the paper turn to nothing and felt something inside me become lighter. Before the room settled, there is one small thing I must ask. If you liked this story, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. It helps people find the tale and keeps the truth moving. After the fire died down to glowing coals, we took a new picture by the tree. The mantel held photos and medals and a little wooden cane ornament. My daughter hugged me and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Dad." I smiled and thought, my cane led, but truth carried me. The house filled with warmth and laughter, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at home. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and tell me what you would have done if you were Grandpa Will Gray in the comments section.